here's the structure of the presentation I've got for you tonight. One of the key things I wanted to say right at the start was that you can only increase your club membership in a handful of ways. One is that some orienteers can join you from another club. The second way is that some orienteers that left you for a while for whatever reason can rejoin the club, or you have newcomers. So if you want to expand your club membership, it's crucial that you do that. In the structure, I'm therefore going to talk to start with about why did we form the NRG, as we called it, the Newcomer Retention Group, what was its remit and its membership. And I've tried to summarize the point I've just made about how the active club membership can be increased from newcomers, from members of other clubs, and from people returning to the sport. On the other hand, you can lose members who get infirm or die, or leave to join other clubs, or no longer get interested in orienteering. So if you look at that, going the right way through this, you will see that there is the only way you can increase your income, if you're getting income from a number of people that are running at your events, or your club membership fees perhaps a little bit, and to increase, most importantly, the size of your volunteer pool, is to focus on making sure you keep your beginners. You notice I've used the term beginner there. The Newcomer Retention Group formed a view that we thought newcomer was a slightly not quite as inclusive term as we would have preferred. So we're trying to, in the main, use beginner rather than newcomer. Not something you need to go and change things about, but in future we're going to suggest you use beginner. This was the remit of the Newcomer Retention Group. I'm not going to read through every bit of that. You'll get a chance to read through it there if you haven't already looked at the report. The report is, by the way, published on the Orienteering Foundation website, and you can retrieve a copy from there if you haven't already seen it. Another comment I'm going to make as you're reading through that is that the best benefit we can get from tonight's presentation is if you ask questions, either to clarify things or to suggest things we might have looked at, or even to challenge some of the recommendations we've got. Because although I think we had a good group of people with a lot of relevant experience, there's no way that we could have the definitive answer to all of these questions. So I think we'll improve the session if you can pose your questions, and I will try to answer them, or at least put your viewpoint forward so that others can hear it. So that was the remit that we had. I'm not going to talk about the definitions that we used. You'll find those in the report. I think, and that same applies also for the regular participants. We can come back to that, but we did attack most of the other things there. And if you want to see these definitions, you can see them in the full report. This was the membership of the group. I thought we had a very good group. They were all volunteers. They put their names forward, and not everybody who put the name forward was accepted. But we had a mixture of ages, a mixture of geographies, a mixture of people from club chairmen, people who are membership secretaries, people that have worked constantly with beginners over a number of years. So we had quite a wide experience to contribute to the group's efforts. So I'm not also going to cover the methodology that we used and how we went about our work. Again, I have a slide on that, but I'm going to go past it simply to move on to the website survey. I've got it there, so if a question arises, we can go back and look at that if it's of particular interest. One of the first things we noticed when we were discussing this was that clubs didn't seem to be using their websites as effectively as we felt they could to interest beginners. There's an argument, I think, that a club website should be designed solely for beginners. That seems perhaps a bit strange calling it a club website to do that. But the thinking there is that the most important visitors to your website are newcomers that might be attracted to the sport or might be thinking of coming to an event and want to find more about what's involved and so on. So unless you tell them and sell them the idea of following through on that, they will not be able to do it. What we therefore decided to do was to do a survey of all of the open clubs websites. There are 84 of them, and I'm extremely grateful to the members of the group because they not only did they share up those visiting of the websites amongst them, but they then revised them, reviewed each other's work as part of that to try and eliminate any errors or to eliminate as much as possible any subjectivity. So here's what we've surveyed. We looked at only the beginner section of a website. We were not interested in the style of the website in terms of what software was used to present it. We simply looked at it as if you were a beginner, what did it cover these points? These were the points that we thought were the most important ones that should be addressed in a beginner section. For example, what is orienteering about? What's the concept of orienteering you're trying to explain to somebody if they haven't already encountered it? What equipment and clothing might they need in order to come to their first event, and so on. And just in case you haven't come across the term, VOCs are virtual orienteering courses, but I think most people are now using that quite extensively. One thing that was interesting about this is, which I'll come back to later, is that see right at the very bottom bullet point there, we also asked the question, did it generate any kind of sense of adventure or challenge or excitement or enjoyment from the website, or was it rather bland? Because we think, again, that was important. This is what summarizes the results of the survey. There was 56 was the average rating out of 100. The median rating, meaning there was as many clubs below 60 as above 60, as you can see was 60. 3 clubs rated 0, usually because they didn't have any kind of newcomer or beginner section at all, and 1 club was rated at 100. We took the view right from the outset that it would be very easy for people to look at this as a criticism of what clubs have done. And we're very conscious that clubs have got a lot of volunteer pressure. They may not have the skills to keep websites as up to date as they would like, and therefore it was not intended in any way to be that. And there was also some degree of subjectivity still remaining in this survey. So we didn't want people looking at that and somehow judging their club as better or worse than somebody else's. So that's why we didn't publish and have still not published a formal listing of what each club scored. We're just asking each club to look at these website surveys, and if they agree with our rating of a particular topic, then to consider whether they might be able to improve that in due course. This gives you an idea of the distribution of the ratings we did in the website. So column 1, the first column on the left-hand side is the clubs who scored, number of clubs, 8 clubs that scored between 0 and 10, and there were 2 clubs or 3 clubs scoring between 11 and 20, and so on as you go across the page. And you'll see in the bar graph that the majority of clubs were scoring in this 50-60 sort of area. And then there was a few people down in the 90s or 100, 4 clubs in fact. What were the reasons for these low scores? Well, as I've already said, they might not have a newcomer section at all, or they might have a newcomer section that was poorly labelled or difficult to find. If I give you an example of that difficult to find thing, sometimes they were on the 4th scroll down part of the home page with no link to tell you that that's where it was. Or they were there on the website, but they were stored under resources and other information, which is hardly a sort of welcoming, easy to find place if you're looking for the knowledge from a beginner viewpoint. Another reason was that very few of the websites had any map extracts. And that seemed to us rather odd, because the whole concept of orienteering relies on maps. It's an example, a way of showing people what a map looks like. It's a way of brightening up what the website looks like. And it's also a chance to show them some of the very basic concepts in orienteering. Do you go around or over the hill? Do you follow the paths, or do you go through the forest, or do you do a mixture of the two, and which suits your style better? The 4th and 5th points I've listed there quite often came up, that relevant sections not linked. What we're talking about here is that if a newcomer, as we would hope, you are pointing them at permanent orienteering courses as a very useful place to find practice opportunities and to become more familiar with orienteering maps and so on, then having a section on permanent orienteering courses is fine on your website, but you need to have a link in the newcomer section pointing people at that website and telling them why it's relevant particularly to them. So that covers the last 2 bullet points, if you like. What I've said here is that the good news about that survey, which might be a little bit disappointing, is that most of those problems could be very easily fixed if people agree with the points we were making and what the changes that would be required in order to achieve them. So here are some website suggestions that are made in the report. Clearly it is restating what I've covered in another way of saying that you should clearly identify the beginner and newcomer section. Call it a beginner section. Have it on the home page. Ideally have it as the first item of first tab on the home page you can go to, or even be the main home page if that's what you feel is want to do it. And the other thing is that you should have the sections that are important for beginners should be linked to and explained why. I would suggest those should be, how do I find out about future events? Where do I find out about any coaching that's available? What is the idea of a permanent or virtual orienteering course, and why is it interesting to me? So these are the examples. This is here, I know it's a bit wordy as a slide, but that's giving a sample text of what you might put for beginners about permanent orienteering or virtual orienteering courses, explaining that you can do them whatever day and whatever time that suits you. It fills in periods between more formal events that the club might be putting on, gives you a chance to practice techniques. Don't rely on just the fact there's 1 or 2 courses there. Sometimes clubs have very helpfully indicated, here's 3 or 4 ways you can use this permanent orienteering course, but there's plenty of other ways that people can then invent to use the fact that the markers are there for a limited period. And of course you could rerun the leg and compare whether the different ways that you approached it produce different results and why, and see what lessons you can learn from that. And of course, finally, the point I was trying to make, that we have a link to the permanent orienteering course page as part of that. And there's the same kind of thing here. I mean, this is just made up. It could be anything like that. I'm just pointing to them that if you want to find out more about events, our club's events are listed here, and there'll be a link to that. Or you should also consult the British Orienteering fixture list here, because there may be other clubs running events that you could attend. And of course, there are other ways of accessing the event list, even the British Orienteering one. So you may want to help them with that until they become more familiar with it. Looking on from that, the next thing that we were fortunate to discover was that British Sport England were offering clubs, not just clubs, but national governing bodies in a range of different sports, the possibility of having people visit particularly beginner-orientated sessions. Sometimes those were not what you would call competitions, but an introduction to cycling or to other sports. And we were able, with British Orienteering's help, as their partner, to ask Sport England to do this. That meant, unfortunately, we could only do that for orienteering in England rather than in Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland. But I think still the results are quite interesting. So that's what I want to talk about now. The events were carried out, the assessments were carried out by a company called Right Directions. They employed, I think, presumably part-time staff that they can call on from time to time, who put themselves in a position of being a newcomer to orienteering. In every case they'd never orienteered before. They were invited to look up a particular event, find out all the details about it, enter the event, go to the event, see how they were received, and then write a report about it. And what we did with those reports is we have put, again, because we don't think it's appropriate to share that widely, we shared the event with the club concerned. So your club might be one of the 3 that was visited, and you may already have seen your report, but if not, they were simply shared in the way that's described on the screen. The main findings that came out of that was that there was 3 clubs, 3 events at 3 clubs, so you can't draw too many lessons. But the positive things were that every club said, every visitor said, we were extremely pleased how welcome we were. Everyone was keen to help us. Everyone was anxious that we enjoyed ourselves and so on. So these were very good points to hear them coming back. An interesting second point, which is the 4th bullet down the page, the second last bullet, was there were quite a few comments saying how surprised they were to find the wide range of participants at the event. I think that's both a strength and a weakness, because it does show that people find it remarkable that they can see everyone from 8 to 80 all at the same orienteering event on the same day. I find that really quite strange and somehow very positive. But we also know, of course, that can be a negative viewpoint, a negative thing to find. If you're in the 20 to 35 age bracket and you arrive there and there's only 2 other people in that age bracket participating, because you naturally want to share your experiences with people roughly of your own age, and that's not always possible. However, there was one interesting thing, and that you see down at the bottom there. None of the 3 clubs who had these beginners contacted the beginner afterwards. So although they had the beginner's details, email address at the very least and other things. They had made no attempt to contact them after the event, saying, how did you find the event last Wednesday or last Saturday or whatever it was, and to encourage them to go and try permanent orienteering courses, tell them about the next event, encourage them to say they would like to see them back again, and so on. So that's something that presumably that may have been unluckily only applies to those 3 events, but I suspect it's probably wider than that. Getting on to the main bits of what we were doing in the report, is we looked at good practice. What was good practice in dealing with beginners? So that's what I'm going to cover in this next section. There are about 15 examples in the, if I remember correctly, in the report of good practice. I've just picked out some of them here, and I'm going to talk about these in a little bit more detail. The first one is about a poster. And one club is already doing this, and there may be others that we were unaware of that were doing this. And that's to show the basics of orienteering on a waterproof poster, multiple copies of which can be available and shown at the event, and may even be something that you could put onto a leaflet that you can give to people, so if they're on their first event, they can take round with them. And the main reason for that is that if you are pressed for volunteer effort, you may not have somebody who can spend the 10 or 15 minutes that might need somebody to teach them the basics of orienteering. In terms of what the map is and what the circles mean and all these other complexities. And having that means that, first of all, somebody at registration can point them at that and say, go and have a read through that if you haven't read it before. If you're not familiar with it, refresh your memory if you have done orienteering, but not for many years. And then you can come back and ask questions. And the other thing is it can be used by a volunteer as a sort of aid memoir or a visual aid, really, that you can take the beginner over to, and instead of trying to describe to them what a control kite looks like, or what the start flag looks like, or what the controls on the map will look like, or what a control description would look like, you've got examples of them there in front of you to actually say, and this is what it would look like. You can see it compared with today's that looks like this. So at the moment, we are making a recommendation that there should be some effort put into producing such a poster, or it may even be more than one poster. It might be a couple of A3 posters or something like that. And those should, once they're developed, should be then made available so that all clubs, if they wish, can either use them as they stand or perhaps slightly modify them if they feel they need to do that for their own purposes. One other benefit of that is that we also felt that most people coming along to try a sport for the first time are anxious actually to get started. It may not be the best thing for them to do, but can you imagine going to a football coaching session where you spend half an hour being talked about the equipment you'll need and the ball you might want, but not actually getting a chance to kick a ball? We think this could speed the process of people from the time they arrive until the time they actually go off and experience it for the first time. Second one is fairly obvious, that you need to have good, personable people that can deal with beginners at events, trying to understand why they're there, what they're hoping to get out of it, making sure they feel welcome and that they're not feeling lost, which is very easy in the real sense of, I don't understand what I'm trying to do here, which can be very difficult for people to deal with if they don't. Third good practice example is making sure you've got, as we used to have many years ago, where there was flyers at events that people put out, you could pick one up under a stone beside the registration tent or whatever, but at least have available information to give to people. You don't need to be laid out in numbers like that, but to give them as a beginner, here's our next 2 events, here's the details, here's our website, this kind of thing, which might also include social media details so that you can pick up on that beginner's involvement. Fourth bullet point is about permanent and orienteering courses and virtual orienteering courses. Have at least some information about the best ones that are available locally that you might draw a beginner's attention to. And we even made the suggestion that it might be useful to have, particularly for permanent orienteering courses, but equally true for POCs, distribute copies of a pre-printed map with them, simply saving that person the time and effort of going to try and find cafe you get it from, or the website you download it from, or whatever, with the difficulties that may entail. So there you are, you've got the map now, you can go when you want. And also, good practice is, what's the follow-up plan to offer a beginner after the first event? what would you suggest to them that they do? So we go back to the mystery visit there. You got people coming back. One or two people actually came back in the report and said, this was fantastic. I've not enjoyed myself so much on a Wednesday evening for a long time. Now, those are marvellous things for people to be saying, but nobody contacted them after the event to say, are you aware there's another event next week and this is what you should be doing? So, which was disappointing. Okay. As far as we use this approach in terms of thinking about beginners. What is the ideal beginner experience? Your club can define this for itself and say, what is it? How would you want people to feel as they arrive? They will probably be a little bit worried. They won't quite know what to do. But we would hope perhaps a little bit excited at the opportunity and say, well, this could be interesting and so on. So looking forward to enjoying themselves at least. But then what might their motivations be? Could it be they want to make new friends, new contacts? So giving them the opportunity to orienteer, but not the chance to speak to a lot of people, may not satisfy them very much. And trying to find out what their motivations are in that initial discussion is quite a tricky job, even for an experienced and welcoming person. But it could be very well worthwhile if you get an idea of the motivations and then try to match their experience to that. An example of that would be if it is somebody that likes to meet and discuss things with other people, make sure that several people are briefed to be talking to that beginner after they finish doing the course, and asking how they got on, talking about their own experiences and so on, so that they can feel more welcomed and get the contact they want. Think about what help they might need and how will they get it. That goes back to our poster, for example, but also other people around that may be helping them. And what do you want them to feel as they finish and leave? Unless you have an idea of what you want them to feel like and what you want them to do, you're not so likely to be able to succeed in doing that. And then, of course, an important point, how do you get feedback from them? Certainly speaking to them after the event is a key thing, but then following it up after the event is equally valuable, I think. Okay, we put our questions and helps to do that review structure into 5 sections before a beginner attends an event. And that's what information is on the website, for example, what briefing did they get. Just give you a typical example of that. If you have people signing up for an event beforehand and you identify them or they self-identify as a beginner or a relatively inexperienced orienteer, you may be able to point them at the website and say, please have a look at this link, which will give you a good start before you come to the event. The second area where you need to think about is that at the event, but before the run, all the complexities of dealing with registration, if it's not been done online, but understanding how to use a hired SI card or EMIT card, and all the other things that the poster might address. And then after the run, what are you doing to speak to beginners after the run? And quite importantly, how will you know it is a beginner? How will you know it is a beginner who's arrived? How will somebody identify them at the end and say to them, we recognize that probably is not exclusively successful, but it could often be simply on the basis of hiring an SI card or an EMIT card. Because when they come back with that, that's the opportunity for somebody to chat to them, or for somebody to be picked up to say, you should have a word with so-and-so because he deals with people that have just run for the first time. Then after the event, which is the contact after the event spoken about, and then there's some structural things to talk about, which is about how do you structure your program of events so that it's easier for people having gone to the first one of them to go to a series of successive ones. You don't want 5 events which are one every 3 months, unless you've got a plan of how, if a beginner comes to that first one, they are then going to get the chance to become hooked on doing it. I know from my own experience, and I've heard other people say this, there's nothing worse than an orienteering come for the first time. I would have pressed this by mistake.
Sorry, Neil, can I interrupt a second? We've had a few questions come in. Sorry, I was dealing with a few questions, obviously emails coming in and whatnot. So I'm catching up on a few questions now, and apologies if some of these may have been answered already, but that'll be a quick answer then. So if you don't mind, we'll just intervene at this stage. Yeah. So one question from Julia here: Did you survey all UK club websites?
We surveyed the 84 open club websites. So
yes,
there's quite a number of closed clubs which have restrictions on who their members can be, and therefore their attitude to beginners and newcomers is probably considerably different. But yes, we surveyed all 84. I think it's 84.
It's all 84.
I think 5, and then one of them changed their status at the time we did it.
Okay, and I think the answer to this is probably no, but it says, can you share which club gained 100% as it would be useful as a best practice guide? But I don't think you're sharing. No, you're not sharing other clubs' results.
Let me see. We had quite a long discussion about this in the group, and what we eventually decided to do, and you'll find it in the report, is there are about 7 or 8 what I would call citations. Just let me pick there, but I'll give you an example, so I'm just not thinking my board. A club for having a particularly good, visually appealing website and newcomer section. Another club for having a well-written beginner guidance in a cartoon style. Somebody else for having a good question and answer section, and so on. So we've listed a number of examples like that. But I think we hesitated to say this club here is the one that either scored 100 or scored 90, and therefore now is excellent, because there's still some subjectivity in that, and we felt it was better just to pick out examples of things that people would go and look at. And you actually get a better feel for how different people are presenting it if you look at those examples that are in the report. There's a section on, for example, good training sections to give people guidance.
I think that answers Carol's question as well regarding the top scoring clubs. We're not going to you're not going to produce obviously any results table or whatnot. Another question here is, can I see my club's website score? And the answer to that I know is yes, from a chair's point of view. So that was sent out to chairs and secretaries, isn't that right, Neil?
That's correct. It was sent out because there's 84 of them, and they were all personalised to some extent, if you understand. They were sent out over a 1-week period in late November last year, if I remember the dates correctly, last week of November. And it was sent to all club secretaries and website. I've had a couple of inquiries from people subsequent to that saying they didn't see it. And I'm slightly nervous that maybe one club or two may have seen some of those disappear into spam folders or something like that. But also they could have gone to a club secretary or club chairman who has forgotten about it, hasn't passed it on. And in those instances, if anybody writes to me and says, I'm in Club X, can I see our survey? Then as long as we're happy that they really are in Club X, we'll send them another copy. So that's easy to do.
Super. And a good question here. Were their websites reviewed only by the Newcomer Retention Group? And did any non-orienteers review websites?
The answer was yes and no.
Yes and no, yes.
They were only reviewed by Newcomer Retention Group people, and there were no non-orienteers who reviewed them. We tried to put ourselves in the position of beginners looking at that, so that may be a mistake or something that could be improved on if we are actually doing it. But it's quite difficult then to you're trying to assess. You get the opposite end of the stick if you do that. You either have experienced people looking at it and therefore not doing that well because they are experienced, but you also get the other problem at the other end. If it's a total newcomer looking at it, they've no idea whether what they've been given is a good representation or helpful or not, because they don't know what to expect. But the answer was no, didn't use any non-orienteers.
Thank you. I'll leave a few questions towards the end. Then thanks, Neil. I'll let you continue on there. Thank you.
Okay. Here's some of we also published what we call a club self-audit, where you can ask yourself the questions against our structure, and these are some sample questions. So before the event, question is asking yourself, does your beginner section excite and enthuse a beginner with no jargon? Does it use a lot of photos, map segments, and links to videos? Quite a lot of clubs didn't have any links. There's at least a dozen really good videos out there now that can be used, and it's quite simple to get them and point to them. There's there's not any great job in creating your own video like that. Secondly, if you're looking at the event before the run, another example, here's the first point I've made there. Have you at least alerted your members to the importance of retaining beginners and encourage them to interact positively with beginners when the opportunity arises? That means being interested in what they've done, even though they're only doing a yellow or an orange course, and you might think, well, why would I be interested in that? It makes a big difference to a beginner if somebody's interested in, and as part of that, they start to learn skills and so on, and as well as having the social contact that many are looking for. We realize this is difficult for other clubs to do, but sometimes they're so big, you're able to have a team of people, 2 or 3 people whose job it is solely to look after beginners. Other clubs, that's probably not practicable, but maybe you could have one person whose job it is to do that. And that's their top priority, no matter what else they might be being asked to do. And of course, the point I think you can read for yourself at the bottom, that after the run, what else would you be expecting people to do? The free maps, for example. So finally, I want to move on to then a section on our recommendations. And we've covered most of those. There's a section in a series of recommendations in the review, but they've been covered implicitly in what I've been saying so far. But one particularly I wanted to pick up was a question that's coming up quite often just now about entry on the day. We've noticed that because of the COVID restrictions, a lot of clubs moved not having entry on the day. That's perfectly understandable. But many clubs have decided not to move back to having entry on the day. And we think that that's not something that should just be done at a whim. You should just simply say, oh, it's clear there's no reason for having entry on the day, let's not do it. And I've presented here what we think are some of the arguments why you shouldn't have entry on the day, or that you want if you want to do that. But there's reasons against it as well. We realise that you may know map numbers better, many of each of the different courses. The amount of effort required on the day for volunteers is much less, obviously. You don't have to collect money and names and so on. And you can use the online entry to direct beginner to introductory material, saying, now you've signed up, have a look at this section on our website, and you'll be in a better position to get on the day. And it's also easier to collect information of contact with the beginner, and you can cater for any GDPR requirements quite easily in the entry process, so that you then have captured at the very least the email address of somebody who's entering, and you can go back to them after the event saying, we noticed you entered this event, we've not seen you at one of our events before, how did you enjoy it? Would you like to have a chat with one of our club members, or whatever else you want to ask? With this short 5-question survey we'd like to carry out, getting feedback about what the beginning experience was in reality. Effectively, you've had your own mystery visitor. Can you glean any information from their view about that? And that may give you interesting insights into how you could improve the process. There's also reasons why you don't want entry on the day. Will beginners actually commit to coming to an event a few days beforehand, rather than being able to decide on the day? And will they actually then come if they have entered it? And so on. And we also are aware of that some of the entry systems are, let's say, difficult to navigate if you're not familiar with them. Would you like to look at one or two of them? I'm not going to mention any names, but there are one or two that, if you haven't used them before, for good reasons, you have to sign up and you have to build a profile of yourself, and so it should be used for subsequent event entry and so on. And it's a bit like, you see this often on other websites. You can choose to register so that they can contact with you, keep contact with you again, and apply information, and you have your own password and so on. Or you can just simply say carry on as a guest. And it's drawing the distinction between those two things. Some of the orienteering entry systems are really very complicated if you're not familiar with them. So be wary of that, thinking about beginners from that viewpoint. Okay, I've gone through that fairly quickly. I was trying to do it in maybe 35, 40 minutes, which I think I've managed to do. I'm sorry if it's come over a little bit quick. Remember that I've only covered the main points out of our report. The report's on the website, and you're very welcome to go and get it and have a look through it. And I would encourage you, and one of the key measures that the Newcomer retention group felt was that the only way that our work will have been successful if we see improvements in how beginners are actually being handled. Are the websites better? Is the actual beginner experience at events better than it was before? Only if it's just a report that people say, well, that was interesting, and they put it on the shelf or throw it in the bin, then we've achieved nothing. So we're asking you very strongly, please look at the recommendations. You don't have to adopt them all. You don't have to adopt even the majority of them. But if there's some of them there that strike a chord with you, then please look at those. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'll be happy to pick up any other questions. And remember, we'd equally be happy to have comments coming back, challenging some of the things that I've said or that are in our report, or making other suggestions, because we realise we don't have all the wisdom in this area. So if you've got some good ideas, please come forward. So I was going to suggest I hand back to Rick now, and he takes back control of the meeting.
Yes, thank you very much, Neil. Thank you for all the work which you and the retention group have done on this. A couple of questions or some statements as well. One of them was directed more towards British Orienteering regarding developing a poster which will be helpful especially for beginners as they come, for clubs to use, and certainly that's something which the development team can and will look at. And somebody mentioned there regarding a Norwegian banner being made, and with I presume with some basic information to have up at maybe at the registration or the start or something for beginners to look at. So that'd be useful to explore. Question that's come up here is how important is social media in attracting newcomers and retaining them? Neil, do you want to mention something like that? I certainly have an opinion on that, but
yes, I think one thing that's quite important, I think, to say is that our remit, which I could put back up, but it's not crucial, is that we were dealing with retaining newcomers who have arrived at events, or in attracting them to how you deal with them once they are committed to coming. It was not in our remit, how do you attract these newcomers? What's the best way of doing that? Although we did realise that we thought that was an important area that a lot of clubs pay attention to, but there doesn't seem to be any consolidated best practice guidance or whatever about that. And therefore, one of the recommendations in our report was a recommendation for future work, if I can just find what it was, while I'm talking about that, which was that we're saying to people that it was our fourth recommendation for future work, which was develop guidance on successful ways to attract beginners so that they can be retained. We can't retain them if they haven't been attracted in the first place. But that was outside our scope of work.
Certainly found in our club, whenever we do social media, Facebook and whatnot, it does attract more attention to our events. It creates a bit of a buzz before the events amongst the members and newcomers as well. And certainly we found creating WhatsApp groups for maybe families, connecting them together when we're doing come and try out events. That seems to create a buzz as well. So there's I guess social media can be used in many ways. A question came up from Stephen regarding.
Just before you go to that, could I offer a couple as well?
Yes.
I think that your comments, some of which were new to me, and perhaps my comments might be new to other people, indicate the need for pulling together some of the ideas that people have with that. The other comment I was going to make about that is that each club should have at least annually an event where they say to all the club members, it's bring a friend to Orienteering Day, where what they do is they actually try to find a relative, business colleague, friend, whatever it is, and try and attract them more than one if they can to come to that event. And it's their job to induct them, help them, try to make them have a good time at that event. And if you took a club that had 70 members and 50 members managed to do that, and only 10 of the people that came stayed on, to be future participants, it'd make a huge difference. But there are many ideas of that, but it needs somebody to sit and pull them together.
Yeah, a quick question here, which would be hopefully easy. Who sent the report email in November? Was it from yourself? Do you know the actual person?
Yes, it was sent from my personal ID. if it would help, which is nm.cameron@btinternet.com. nm.cameron@btinternet.com.
Just in case somebody's looking for it. Yeah. I've got a question.
I've no problem in resending it to anybody. If there's somebody in a club there that says, "Wait, I haven't seen our website survey," contact me, and we've got copies of them all, and we can send them. In fact, I think what I did to make sure this information wasn't lost, it will gradually phase out of use, because the surveys were done in the period from June through to September time. So you have to remember that that was a review that was done that may now be almost 6 months old. But if you contact the Orienteering Foundation administrator, who's Viv McDonald, whose details you'll find on our website, she has access to the complete master file of those website surveys, and will send them to anybody who particularly wants them or needs another copy.
Yeah, thank you. Got a question here. If beginners do not immediately commit to joining the club, how do you cope with the BOF maximum 3 events before you join rule? That's no longer actually a rule anymore. So there used to be an insurance thing with regards to that, and that's no longer the case. So hopefully that's answered that one.
Can I comment on that? We actually somebody said that to us, I think during the discussions, or I can't remember where. It was clear to me that the fact that we knew that was no longer a rule, but it was clear that quite a number of other people did not. So I would suggest that the very point you just made just now, and the question you just had, suggests that should be republicised in some way to make sure.
Yeah, we need to make clubs aware that that's not the case. Yeah, so flag that up. So thank you for that question, and that's something which needs to be highlighted. It says here, I'm just reading these as they come in. You've talked about the run, and the sport is essentially an individual running sport, but many beginners have come obviously with the idea that it's a small group walking activity. So dealing with that, has anybody got any questions regarding that, Neil? I'm sure you have no objections if people walk or run or go individually or as a group, whereas maybe some clubs do.
If you look back at our website survey questions, even the slide I had, one of the things we asked about the website survey is, did it say you could walk or run in the description of orienteering that you gave on your beginner section in the website? Now, it's for each club to decide what they want to say, of course, but we felt it was important not to exclude people, because often people start off walking and then realise that it's actually quite fun to run a little bit and so on. But it definitely, in order to only to walk, if that's what you want to do, you can enjoy the countryside, enjoy the company, enjoy the challenge of the orienteering, and still only be walking. In fact, some of us, as we get older, end up having to do that anyway. I think the point I would make about that is that each club has to decide that. And a second point is that, which is really tricky, and we've got some other work going on about this at the moment, is that how you describe orienteering in a website is really tricky. Do you want to say it's absolutely great fun pushing your way through dense bracken and maybe running over muddy ground and having to jump a stream and things like that, which will appeal to one type of potential participant or will completely put off another? So writing that section is really difficult, because what demographic are you actually trying to attract? So you could either design a section and say we are going to only go for people between 20 and 40 that have a certain attitude, and even then that may not cover all the people within that age group. Or we are going to try and cover them all, but then you have the danger that you end up not actually addressing anyone. And that's a really difficult challenge.
Yeah, I think that's important. I think we are generally welcoming. It's just, how do we get our welcome across? How do we get it out there? And what demographic, as you say, are we trying to attract? Who do we feel that's for us as clubs to look at our age profile, our gender profile, and see what's missing, and who do we really want to attract to our club. So I think that's a personal thing for clubs to look at. And one last question which came up, which I did say at the start, but obviously with the start being people not getting in, and the whole video will be available to view. We will post it up onto the British Orienteering Training and Resources page of our website under webinars. And also, Neil's kindly going to make his slides available as well. They'll be posted up onto the website as well. So I think that's all the questions I have, I think, for which have come in. So Neil, unless there's anything else you want to say, I just want to say thank you very much again for you and the group's work on this, and for you presenting this evening, and thank you for everyone's patience. And we have had most people attend, which is fantastic, and they even with the interruption at the start. So apologies again for that, and thank you for bearing with us. And hopefully there won't be these problems in the future.
Just one comment, Rick, and that's to say the report, repeat again, is available on the Orienteering Foundation website, and there's quite a lot more in it than I've been able to cover in the presentation tonight. So if you're interested in the topic and want to see probably your best to get a copy of that and look at the whole thing rather than my selected section in the slides and so on. But that's up to each individual participant tonight as to whether they think that's worthwhile.
Okay, thank you very much. Good evening, everyone, and hope to see you in a future session. All the very best. Thank you, Neil. Bye-bye now.
Thank you.